deep in a far-flung corner of the world. But not too far, you don't want to fall off the edge of the earth. Lie a group of unique islands. Unimposing, undisturbed by man for centuries, they paint a colourful history for a place so young.
What happens here?
Not long after the world said adios to the dinosaurs, the continents began to get a little xenophobic. Australia, not wanting to spend an eternity with the penguins, chose to split it. New Zealand, not wanting to spend an eternity with Australia, said,
"Fuck this shit, I'm out."
And bailed in turn. They tried the continent thing for a while, but that didn't really hold water, and for a few million years remained a refuge to the birds and the bees.
Step bro.
That's when suddenly some hairy-footed creatures came ashore and started running around like they owned the place. They built a life for themselves, foraging, building huts and dens to sleep in. They even had their own stupid language. Unfortunately, these indigenous peoples to New Zealand, the quote-unquote hobbits, were killed off in a large volcanic eruption around the year 200, the crater of which forms the largest lake in New Zealand today. The story of their demise was brought to life in a 3-part, 9-hour documentary series, directed by Peter Jackson of Pukerua Bay, starting in 2001, a year that is not historically significant for any other reason. Yeah, nah, but seriously, approximately 1,000 years later in this year, some canoes arrived, led by an explorer who may or may not be real. The people he led here, the Maori, were indeed real, and they started to build a life for themselves. You know, foraging, building meeting huts and dens to sleep, yeah, you get the idea. They even had their own stupendous language. They fought amongst each other for a few hundred years at a time, at one point taking a break to help the moa go extinct. The Dirty Dutch then tried to get involved, but that ended in disaster, so they packed up their windmills and blew away, but not before giving the place a bit of a glow-up. The Brits weren't far behind. They had a quick glance and asked if this was free real estate. The people already there said no, which they took as meaning yes, and boom. A brand new colony was born. New settlers from New Zealand, the company, not the country, brought old comforts to these new lands as gifts for the natives. Most prominent amongst them were the potato, God, and the flu. Also muskets, lots and lots of muskets, which came in real handy when trying to outdo each other, but don't tell them. Eventually, Māori started to feel uncomfortable with the British settlers, so they went and asked King William, very nicely, if they could have independence, and he said, "Ah, shucks," which was declared in 1835. Then, he died, and his niece Victoria wasn't as keen on the whole natives having territorial integrity in the British colonies kind of thing, and also the French were establishing whaling posts in Akaroa, which was kind of awkward for the settlers already there. So, on February the 6th, 1840, hundreds of iwi leaders gathered in Waitangi in New Zealand's far north to sign a treaty. This treaty was split into 3 articles, and 2 versions of the treaty were written to cover both languages. In the English version, Māori were to cede sovereignty of New Zealand to Britain, and give the British Crown an exclusive right to buy land, and in return would be guaranteed full rights of possession of their land, forests, fisheries, and other treasures, and given the rights and privileges of British subjects. The translated Māori version says exactly the same thing. Or the complete opposite, depending on who you ask. But don't worry, absolutely no further issues will come about from this slight oversight. But anyway, Maori enjoyed their newly found freedom as British subjects and partook in a wide variety of British pastimes. We're talking tea drinking, livestock farming, horse racing, mining, whaling, axe throwing, wood chopping. Nope. Wait. That means war. Tensions between Maori and the local British were at their highest. Sparked by an incident at Wairo near Blenheim a year earlier, additional niggles like this certainly didn't cool hostilities. General land and other tribal grievances engulfed many iwi in war with the British over the next 27 years. But it wasn't all bad. I don't think. Elsewhere, things were on the up for the local economy. Increased immigration brought new ideas and old ideas. Was discovered, leading to a rush of the precious metal, and Chinese immigrants as cheap labour to gather it all up. They even paid us for the privilege. In the 1870s, a grand public works program saw roads, railway and communication lines built. Electricity and gas became commonplace and industries industrialised, all at a time when the country was granted self-governance and a new capital established. But, despite all of these privileges, as if gold wasn't enough, the country's women, much like the women of today, thought they weren't privileged enough and asked for more. Small things, like wanting their husbands to stop drinking alcohol after coming home from a long day at work, followed by hitting on the barmaids at the pub. And voting. Bah! What do they think this place is? Saudi Arabia? Eventually, they nagged the government enough that in 1893, the women of New Zealand became the first in the world to vote for their elected representatives. And by women, I mean European and Maori women. See? I told you it wasn't all bad.
Are you sure about that?
Oil. Banknotes, the world's first flight. From a country with a flightless bird as our national icon, no less. Eat your heart out, right, brothers? Some split atoms, then more war. After an emperor's son's brother was killed by a sandwich,
Subway. Eat fresh.
most of Europe began to get a little xenophobic. Especially Germany, who had a few Pacific islands in their midst. After Britain declared war on Germany, New Zealand decided to be a good pal and help wipe the Germans out of the region. The New Zealand Army had a quick glance at Samoa and asked the Germans there if this was free real estate. The Germans said no, which they took as meaning yes, and boom, a brand new trust territory was born. But whilst New Zealand made a great contribution in personnel to World War I, it also came with a great loss. Thousands of men were killed over 6 months in fighting at Gallipoli against the Turks in a devastating campaign for the Allies. Elsewhere, more Kiwis were killed on the front lines in Western Europe, including at Ypres, the Messin, and the Somme. Every year, all New Zealanders reflect on the sacrifices these men made in their pursuit of peace, symbolised with a poppy, the perpetual exception to the black and grey palette that stained those fields. Lest we forget. Whilst an Allied victory in the war didn't necessarily mean a stronger economy, it did mean an economy that became fascinated with boards, power boards, wall boards, dairy boards,
Moo.
meat boards, unemployment boards, chess
speaks for
boards,
itself.
blackboards, whiteboards, water boards, lots and lots of boards, which governed the movers and shakers of this country. Oh yeah, shake. I forgot the country does that sometimes, but anyway. Whilst the earthquake in Hawke's Bay wasn't the biggest the country had seen, it was then and still remains today the deadliest. When asking for help from its closest allies, the Brits sent a couple of boats. The Americans, thinking we're still a part of Britain, said nothing. The Aussies said, "Leading kangaroos," and stole Farlap and a couple of cakes. But fortunately, the city would rebuild itself just in time for Great War, the sequel. New Zealand would fight nobly against the Axis powers in the Pacific Theatre against Japan, in North Africa and Greece against the Germans, particularly in a brutal battle in Crete, and eventually against the Italians in their homeland. New Zealand troops continued to serve in many campaigns through the years, including in Korea, Malaya, Vietnam, East Timor, and Afghanistan, to name a few. In 1947, New Zealand officially split it from Britain
Fuck this shit, I'm out.
and immediately began giving themselves more political power by literally unaliving half of the parliament. The two main political parties would go back and forth for the rest of time and memoriam, slightly tweaking the minor discrepancies between them for the foreseeable future. But anyway, the country continues to soar to new heights, from the top of the world to the bottom, building bridges across entire nations to across the North Shore. More gas, more oil, more roads, more power lines, more planes and plane hotels. TVs too. Books, coins, freshly cut loins, steel mills and smelters and prestidigitators.
What?
I truly love baked beans on toast. I really do like them. Alison Holst? Host? Well, whatever. Enough of this Dr. Lorax mumbo-jumbo nonsense. What comes next? Now it's 1975 and society's social compass has started to shift. Piqued by some further issues which came about from that slight oversight from earlier, the issue of Maori land rights was red hot. One woman in particular was so hot and bothered by it all, she went for a wee stroll to cool off. A few others joined her. The government, fearful of more people going off on wee strolls, decided to set up a commission, which is still in place today. And while small groups still like camping out at golf courses and monuments, most of these tensions, slowly but surely, started to cool. The next decade was defined by professional complaining, a very sporty country which enjoyed multi-sport events, triumphs and successes in the few years past and in the few years future, held a national debate between rugby and racism. And the winner, you guessed it, rugby, for the most part. A time for planes, trains and automobiles. Minus the planes, trains and automobiles. Over a typical week in the late 70s, early 80s, most Kiwis spent Friday through Sunday protesting all forms of racism. Then Monday, workers' rights. Tuesday, gay rights. Wednesday, nuclear testing. And the outlook for Thursday. Well, that's your weather. Now, let's take a look at what's going on in the Pacific. Whoa, that's one flash-looking bikini. The French, needing a place to let a couple mega ones rip, were angry about not getting their whaling colony all those years back, and had a quick glance at some nice sandbars without any human life. I said without any human life. That's better. They asked the countries of the South Pacific if this was free real estate. The Pacific said no, which they took as meaning yes, and boom, a brand new nuclear testing site was born. Doing what we did best, we complained. The French then bombed a boat in Auckland Harbour, which greatly improved our relations with the French. When asking for help from its closest allies, the Brits sent an invitation to talk about our feelings. The Americans, aggrieved about our anti-destroy the crap out of those pesky commies with nuclear ships stance, sent nothing. The Aussies said, "Bloomin' didgeridoos," and stole Crowded House and a couple of entertainers. But it's fine. I'm sure our state-protected economy that has been performing so well will cover any negative outcomes of the "and we privatise the economy." Well, at least the state won't get as involved in the country's finances and more taxes. Well,
Did I ever tell you the definition of insanity?
Business can come into the country and the stock market collapsed.
Not stars.
And the country's broke. But it's all good. We throw out the old government and bring in a new government that won't do anything reckless.
How many times do we have to teach you this lesson, old man?
Right? Right. The 90s are a time of change. In business, technology, infrastructure, and politics is no different. Feeling betrayed by the two main political parties not fulfilling their main economic policies, in the surprise of the century, Kiwis opted for real change, opting to get rid of a complicated voting system they didn't understand with an even more complicated voting system they didn't understand, because democracy. The MMP voting system, promising to bring proportionality, access and balance, instead delivered confusion, chaos and corporate welfare. We opened a new bank, did some schoolwork, had another land march, this time in the ocean, then banned and later unbanned the act of having a member of the royal family touch one's shoulders with a shiny metal stick. Yeah, maybe it's time for New Zealand to start trading more with the world again. When asking for help from its closest allies, the Brits sent some work visa applications. The Americans, disturbed by the return of the king, sent nothing. The Aussies said, "Blind and billabong willamaloos," and stole all our best nurses and pie recipes.
Always blowing the pie.
But they let us keep some of the people that we gave to them in the first place, that's fine. But the Chinese. Ho ho ho, the Chinese. The Chinese offered cheap electronics, manufactured goods, and money for milk powder, and in exchange looked at some recently renovated penthouse apartments on the Mount. They asked if this was free real estate. The government said yes, which they took as meaning, yeah boy, and boom! A brand new international housing portfolio was born. Retirees with their new senior citizen cards were ecstatic about their newly acquired Oriental-infused capital gains. Huh? What's that? You're a first home buyer who can't afford a place to call home? Oh, sweetheart, there's still plenty of options for you. Apparently Christchurch is still cheap. Oh. Right. That's why. Well, it's not like they're going to have another one now, is it? Okay, fine. But it's not like anything else bad's going to happen in Christchurch now, is it? Oh, this absolute bullshit. Well, that about does it. Much of New Zealand has changed over the last nearly 200 years. Except for our flag. Bruh. And whilst a block of cheese today costs more than your typical Hamilton house on wheels, boy racers continue to fondle giveaway signs late into the night, and those pesky Aussies keep stealing everything we leave on the top shelf. This is still a magic place of hope, wonder, and saucy bit rates. Never too far from a beach, a sheep, or some hippie bogan trying to con you into sampling his latest cherry-scented craft beer contraption. So, get down here, enjoy our natural and man-made wonders. Put on your hiking boots, go jump off a bridge, sip a turmeric soy flat white sitting under the quaint, picturesque landscape of Alright, let me try that one again. Under the quaint, picturesque landscape of Taumata Whakatangi Hanga ko ao ao o Tamatea to the Pōkaka Piki Monga Horonoku Pōkai Whenawiki Tana Tahu. There we go. Now where was I? Oh yeah. Come on down and make your mark on the history of New Zealand. And most importantly, watch out for the flying dildos. So yeah, now if someone asks you what the history of New Zealand is, you know what to tell them.